I've never been what you'd call religious. To be honest, I've always found the whole thing a bit unnecessary. Heaven, hell, divine judgment. It all seemed like stories people told themselves to sleep better at night, to make sense of a world that's mostly chaotic and cruel. I preferred to rely on logic, science, and what I could see and touch. But lately, things have been different. It started small, almost laughable now that I think about it, just little things easily explained away. A book misplaced, keys not where I left them, strange dreams that lingered too long after waking. At first, I shrugged it off as stress or the byproduct of too much late-night reading. But soon, these small oddities began to stack up, piling one on top of the other until they became impossible to ignore. There was one night when I woke up suddenly, heart pounding in my chest, and I could swear I wasn't alone in my room. The air was thick, suffocating, and I could feel eyes on me. Cold, unseen eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I sat up, trying to shake off the feeling, convincing myself it was just another bad dream. But even as I lay back down, the unease clung to me like a shadow. Days turned into weeks, and the occurrences grew more frequent, more intense. What began as simple annoyances morphed into something far more sinister. Lights flickering when I walked into a room, the feeling of icy fingers brushing against my skin, whispers at the edge of hearing that stopped the moment I tried to listen. I started questioning my sanity, wondering if the stress of work, of life, was finally getting to me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong, something beyond my control, beyond reason. I've tried to tell myself that it's all in my head, that there's a logical explanation for everything I'm experiencing. But logic is a fragile thing, easily shattered when the darkness closes in and you're left alone with nothing but your fears. I can't help but feel like there's something, or someone, out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I never used to believe in demons, in the devil, or the Antichrist, but now I'm not so sure. The night it all began, I didn't think much of it. I'd gone to bed like any other night, expecting nothing more than the usual restless sleep. But what greeted me was no ordinary dream. It was something far darker, something that felt too real to simply dismiss as a figment of my imagination. In the dream, I found myself standing in a vast, desolate landscape. The sky above was a sickly red, with clouds that twisted and churned like they were alive. The ground beneath my feet was cracked and dry, with deep fissures that seemed to pulse with a dim, unnatural light. There was no sound, no wind, no rustling of leaves, nothing but an oppressive silence that weighed heavily on my chest. And then I saw him. He appeared out of the shadows, a figure cloaked in darkness. His presence was overwhelming, a force that pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes, cold, burning with an ancient, malevolent power. He spoke, but his voice wasn't something I heard with my ears. It was a voice that reverberated inside my skull, filling every corner of my mind. "I am the Antichrist," he said, his words like a blade slicing through the silence. "You are mine." I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and something else, something that felt like it was pulling at my very soul. The ground beneath me began to tremble, and the fissures widened, revealing a fiery glow that seeped up from the depths below. Symbols I didn't recognize, ancient and twisted, appeared in the air around me, burning with an intense light that hurt to look at. The figure moved closer, and with each step, the air grew colder, the shadows around me deeper. His presence was suffocating, a dark tide that threatened to drown me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the blood rushing in my ears, and yet I was utterly powerless, trapped in this nightmare with no escape. He reached out, his hand like a clawed shadow, and as his fingers brushed my skin, I felt a searing pain, like fire coursing through my veins. The world around me began to twist and distort, the sky darkening to an inky black as the ground split open, revealing a chasm that seemed to stretch into infinity. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon outside, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. But even in the safety of my own bed, the fear lingered, clawing at the edges of my mind. The dream had felt so real, so vivid, that it took me a few moments to convince myself that it was just that, a dream. But the unease didn't leave me. In fact, it grew stronger in the days that followed. I began to notice things, small at first, but enough to set me on edge. Shadows that moved when they shouldn't, fleeting glimpses of something just beyond my vision, and that same oppressive silence from the dream, now seeping into my waking life. The worst part was the feeling of being watched, an unshakable sensation that someone, or something, was always there, lurking just out of sight. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. It was as if the figure from my dream had followed me into the real world, a dark presence that clung to me, whispering threats I couldn't quite hear. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that the dream had just unsettled me more than I realized. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just a dream, and these weren't just shadows. Something was happening to me, something far beyond my understanding, and it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself fully. I kept telling myself that it was all just my imagination, that the dream had left a mark on me that I couldn't quite shake off. But as the days passed, it became clear that whatever was happening wasn't just in my head. The oddities, the unsettling sensations, they weren't going away. In fact, they were getting worse. It started with small things. I'd leave a room only to return and find objects had moved. Just slightly, but enough to notice. A chair that had been pushed in would be pulled out. My keys would be in a different spot than where I'd left them, and doors that I was certain I'd closed would be wide open. At first, I thought I was simply forgetting, but the more it happened, the less I could convince myself of that. Then the smells began. At random times, usually when I was alone and the house was quiet, I'd catch a whiff of something foul like rotten eggs or burning plastic. It would come and go, lingering just long enough to make me gag, then disappearing as if it had never been there. I knew that smell, sulfur. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe there was a gas leak or something wrong with the plumbing, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The worst part was the sense of dread that began to seep into every corner of my life. It wasn't just fear. It was an overwhelming, suffocating feeling that clung to me no matter where I was or what I was doing. It was as if the air itself was thick with it, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. I started to feel like I was constantly being watched, not just by eyes, but by something far more sinister, something that wanted to see me suffer. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a trap, a place where something dark and malevolent was waiting, biding its time. I started losing sleep, too afraid to close my eyes, knowing that when I did, the nightmares would come back. And they did, every night more vivid and terrifying than the last. That same figure, the Antichrist, would appear, taunting me, promising that my torment had only just begun. During the day, I'd find myself on edge, jumping at every little noise, every shadow that moved just out of sight. I started to doubt myself, questioning my own sanity. Was I really seeing these things? Or was it all in my mind? Had that dream been the catalyst for some kind of mental breakdown? But no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, the fear wouldn't go away. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, ready to drag me down the moment I let my guard down. One night, as I was lying in bed, trying to calm my racing thoughts, I felt it, the bed shifting beneath me, like someone was sitting down at the foot of it. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze, too terrified to move. Slowly, I forced myself to sit up and look, but there was nothing there, just empty space, mocking me with its normalcy. But I knew what I'd felt. The mattress had dipped, the weight had been real. After that, things began to spiral. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when I was the only one home, soft whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and that ever-present feeling of being watched grew stronger, more invasive. I started to feel like I was losing control of my own life, my own mind. I became paranoid, constantly checking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, waiting for the next thing to happen. There were moments when I was sure I was on the brink of madness, teetering on the edge of something I couldn't fully understand. I began to wonder if this was all part of some twisted game, a slow, deliberate erosion of my sanity by whatever dark force had targeted me. And in those moments, I'd hear his voice again, echoing in my mind, reminding me that I was his, that there was no escape. I started to believe it. I never thought I'd find myself stepping into a church, let alone looking for answers there. But after everything I'd been through, I was desperate, sleep-deprived, haunted by shadows that seemed to grow darker with each passing day. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed help, and I had no idea where else to turn. The church was old, its stone walls weathered by time, and as I walked inside, I felt a strange mix of comfort and unease. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of incense, and the flickering candles cast long, wavering shadows across the floor. It was quiet, almost eerily so, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting. I found the priest in a small office at the back of the church. He was an older man, with deep lines etched into his face and eyes that had clearly seen too much. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment I hesitated. What was I even doing here? But the memory of those eyes watching me from the darkness, of the bed shifting under an invisible weight, pushed me forward. I sat down and began to tell him everything, about the dream, the figure that called himself the Antichrist, the strange occurrences that had taken over my life. I spoke quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush, afraid that if I stopped, I might never get them out at all. As I spoke, I watched the priest's expression shift from concern to something deeper, something that made my skin crawl. When I finally finished, there was a long silence. The priest leaned back in his chair, his eyes dark and unreadable. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything at all, and the fear in my chest tightened. Then, in a low, measured voice, he asked me to describe the dream again, in as much detail as I could remember. I did, and when I was done, he sighed heavily, crossing himself in a gesture that seemed more out of habit than faith. He looked at me, his gaze steady, but I could see the fear there, lurking just beneath the surface. "What you're describing," he said slowly, "isn't just a haunting. It's far more dangerous. You may be dealing with something that transcends the natural world, something that seeks to break you, body and soul." I felt a chill run down my spine at his words, but I forced myself to stay calm. "So what do I do? How do I stop this?" The priest hesitated, then stood up, walking over to a shelf lined with old, worn books. He pulled one down, a thick, leather-bound volume, and handed it to me. "This is a ritual of protection," he said. "It's not something to be taken lightly, but it may help. Follow the instructions exactly, and don't hesitate. Whatever is targeting you, it's not just trying to scare you. It's trying to claim you." As I took the book from him, the weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. It wasn't just fear I saw in his eyes. It was something worse, pity. He didn't think I stood much of a chance, and that terrified me more than anything else. The priest knew I was up against something far beyond human understanding, something even he was powerless to fully combat. I thanked him and left the church, clutching the book to my chest as if it could somehow protect me from what I knew was waiting for me back home. But as I stepped out into the fading light of the evening, the sense of dread only deepened. I could feel it, the eyes on me, watching, waiting. The priest's words echoed in my mind. "It's trying to claim you." For the first time, I truly understood the magnitude of what I was facing. This wasn't just some passing nightmare, some figment of my imagination. This was real, and it was coming for me. And no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried to fight it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already too late. I knew it was only a matter of time before it came for me. The rituals, the prayers, they were just temporary barriers, like sandbags against a rising tide. I followed the priest's instructions to the letter, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The thing that was hunting me wasn't just some spirit that could be warded off with salt and incantations. It was something far older, far more malevolent, and it wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted. The night it happened, the air was thick with anticipation, as if the entire world was holding its breath. I had barricaded myself in my bedroom, the book from the priest clutched tightly in my hands. Candles flickered around me, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, and the scent of burning incense filled the air, mixing with the ever-present smell of sulfur that had seeped into every corner of my home. I had barely slept in days, my mind fraying at the edges, but I couldn't afford to rest. I knew it was coming, knew that tonight was the night. The house was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards and the low murmur of the wind outside. But even that felt wrong, unnatural, like the world was bending around me, distorting itself in preparation for what was to come. And then it began. The temperature in the room plummeted, the warmth from the candles no longer enough to chase away the chill that seeped into my bones. My breath fogged in the air, and I could feel it again. That oppressive presence, the weight of unseen eyes watching me from the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear and the knowledge that there was nowhere to run. The candles flickered and then snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the faint, unearthly glow of the symbols I had drawn on the floor, but even they seemed to waver, as if they were being smothered by the darkness pressing in around me. And then I heard it, the voice. It was the same voice from my dream, low and reverberating, echoing inside my skull. "You are mine," it whispered, each word dripping with malice. The air grew thick with the stench of sulfur, and I could feel the walls closing in, the darkness around me alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that threatened to swallow me whole. I tried to recite the prayers, to invoke the protection that the priest had told me about, but the words caught in my throat, coming out as a choked whisper. The symbols on the floor began to fade, their glow dimming as the darkness encroached further, until they were nothing more than faint smudges on the floor. I was losing. Whatever protection I thought I had, whatever faith I had tried to muster, it wasn't enough. And then I saw him. He emerged from the shadows, the same figure from my dreams. But this time, there was no waking up. This was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, burning with an ancient fury, and his presence filled the room, pressing down on me like a crushing weight. The darkness around him seemed to pulse and writhe, as if it were alive, feeding off the fear that radiated from me. "You think you can escape me?" he hissed, his voice a twisted mockery of human speech. "There is no escape. You belong to me." I could feel the truth of his words in my very bones, a deep, instinctual knowledge that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I fought, I was already lost. The weight of it crashed down on me, a wave of despair so overwhelming that it took everything I had not to collapse under it. My hands shook, the book slipping from my grasp and falling to the floor with a dull thud. It was over. But even as that thought took hold, something inside me rebelled, a small, defiant spark that refused to be extinguished. I wasn't a believer, but I wasn't ready to surrender either. Not yet. With the last of my strength, I forced myself to speak, to challenge him, to demand answers. "Why me? What do you want from me?" He laughed, a sound that was more of a growl, low and rumbling, shaking the very air around us. "Because you are weak," he said, stepping closer, his form towering over me. "Because you have no faith. You are easy prey." His words cut deep, but that small spark of defiance flared up again, and I clenched my fists, refusing to give in. "You're wrong," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "I won't give up." He paused, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, he began to fade, the darkness around him retreating, pulling back into the corners of the room. "We shall see," he said, his voice echoing in the emptiness as he disappeared from sight, leaving me alone in the cold, dark room. For a long time, I just sat there, too numb to move, too shaken to process what had just happened. The house was quiet again, the air still thick with the scent of sulfur, but the oppressive presence was gone, leaving behind only the lingering echoes of his words. I had survived, but at what cost? The defiance I had felt moments before was already fading, replaced by a deep, gnawing fear that he would return, that this wasn't over. I wasn't sure if I had won anything, or if this was just another step in his twisted game. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred so completely that I didn't know what to believe anymore. Had I really stood up to him, or had I simply delayed the inevitable? As I sat there in the darkness, a single thought echoed in my mind, chilling me to the core. What if I've already lost?